Dr. Marcus Wainwright had spent 15 years of his life studying industrial photography at Cambridge University, specializing in the documentation of working conditions during the late Victorian era. He was considered the foremost expert on 19th-century factory imagery, a man whose methodical approach and unshakable composure had earned him respect throughout the academic world. But on a rain-soaked Thursday evening in October, a single photograph would shatter his sanity so completely that within 72 hours, he would abandon his career, his reputation, and his entire life in England, fleeing to a remote cabin in the Canadian wilderness where he remains to this day, refusing all contact with the outside world. The photograph arrived with no fanfare, tucked inside a manila envelope that had been delivered to his office by a courier who claimed no knowledge of its origin. The return address was smudged beyond recognition, and the only identifying information was a small label that read, "Industrial Workers. Birmingham Textile Mill, 1889. Emergency analysis required." Dr. Wainwright initially assumed it was just another routine authentication request. He had examined thousands of such photographs over the years, documenting the harsh realities of industrial labor during Britain's manufacturing boom. This particular image showed what appeared to be a typical factory floor scene: approximately 20 workers, both men and women, standing beside massive textile looms in what was clearly a poorly ventilated, dimly lit facility that the workers displayed the characteristic appearance of 1880s industrial laborers, gaunt faces marked by malnutrition and exhaustion, clothing patched and repatched from years of wear, hands stained with dyes and oils from their machinery. The women wore simple cotton dresses with aprons, their hair pulled back in practical buns. The men sported the typical working-class attire of the era: wool trousers held up by suspenders, cotton shirts with rolled sleeves, and cloth caps. But, as Dr. Wainwright began his standard examination under magnification, he noticed something that made his scholarly instincts sharpen with interest. Several of the workers were looking directly at the camera, with expressions that seemed wrong for the era. Victorian factory workers photographed during their shifts typically displayed resignation, exhaustion, or the forced stoicism required to avoid losing their jobs. These workers, however, appeared to be experiencing something that Dr. Wainwright could only describe as terror. Their eyes were wide with a panic that seemed to transcend the normal hardships of industrial labor. Their mouths were open as if they had been caught mid-scream, though the formal nature of Victorian photography should have required them to maintain composed expressions during the long exposure time needed for the shot. If you're already feeling that cold chill running down your spine, you need to hit that follow button right now, because what Dr. Wainwright discovered next will make you question everything you think you know about industrial history. Trust me, you don't want to miss where this is going. Dr. Wainwright spent the first week examining the photograph with his standard authentication procedures. The paper stock was consistent with 1889 photographic materials. The chemical composition matched the silver gelatin processes used in that era, and the physical characteristics of the image showed appropriate aging patterns. Every test confirmed what his initial assessment had suggested: this was a genuine photograph from the late Victorian era. But as he delved deeper into the fine details, examining the factory environment itself, Dr. Wainwright began to notice inconsistencies that made his academic training rebel against what he was seeing. The textile looms in the background appeared to be operating in ways that defied the mechanical capabilities of 1889 technology. While Victorian looms were certainly sophisticated for their time, these machines seemed to be moving in patterns that suggested computational control rather than the purely mechanical systems that would have been available in the 1880s. More disturbing still were the subtle details in the factory's construction. Dr. Wainwright was an expert in Victorian industrial architecture, and he could see elements in this photograph that shouldn't have existed until decades later. The electrical wiring visible along the walls appeared to follow safety standards that weren't developed until the early 20th century. The ventilation systems showed design elements that suggested knowledge of industrial air quality management that was far beyond Victorian understanding. But it was what he found in the shadows at the edges of the photograph that began to drive Dr. Wainwright toward the edge of sanity. In the darkest corners of the factory floor, barely visible even under maximum magnification, were shapes that shouldn't exist. They appeared to be machinery, but not the kind of machinery that belonged in a 19th-century textile mill. These were sleek, angular forms that seemed to pulse with their own internal light sources. They moved independently, shifting position between examination sessions as if they were alive. Dr. Wainwright told himself he was imagining things. that the stress of academic deadlines and the strain of working in poorly lit conditions was affecting his perception. But when he brought in colleagues to examine the photograph, they saw the same impossible details. Professor Ellen Morrison, his closest collaborator, and a woman whose analytical skills he had trusted for over a decade, spent 3 days examining the image before she quietly excused herself from the project and refused to discuss what she had seen. Dr. James Whitfield, the university's most respected expert in Victorian industrial technology, lasted exactly 47 minutes before he left Dr. Wainwright's office in tears, muttering something about machines that shouldn't exist and workers who aren't entirely human. One by one, every colleague that Dr. Wainwright asked to examine the photograph either fled his office in distress or politely declined to continue their analysis. Word began to spread through the academic community that Dr. Wainwright had discovered something that was driving seasoned researchers to the edge of psychological breakdown. We're just getting started, and already the story is making hardened academics run away screaming. If you're brave enough to continue, drop a comment right now and tell me, what do you think those machines in the shadows actually are? Because what Dr. Wainwright discovered about them will haunt your dreams. On the 10th night of his investigation, working alone in his office at 2 a.m., Dr. Wainwright made a discovery that would forever change his understanding of industrial history and human evolution, using a new digital enhancement technique that had just become available to historical researchers. He was able to isolate and magnify specific sections of the photograph to unprecedented levels of detail. What he found in those enhanced images defied every law of physics, biology, and chronology that he had spent his career studying. The workers in the photograph weren't entirely human. Under extreme magnification, Dr. Wainwright could see that, while the workers appeared human from a distance, their anatomical details revealed subtle but unmistakable modifications. Some had eyes that reflected light in ways that suggested enhanced visual capabilities. Others showed bone structures in their hands and arms that were clearly designed for interfacing with machinery in ways that normal human anatomy couldn't accommodate. Most disturbing of all, several of the workers displayed what appeared to be ports or connection points along their spines, barely visible beneath their clothing, but clearly artificial in nature. These weren't medical devices or prosthetics, as understood by Victorian science. They were integration points that suggested these individuals had been systematically modified to work in conjunction with machinery. But the modifications weren't crude or primitive. They showed a level of biotechnological sophistication that wouldn't be achieved by human science for over a century. These workers had been enhanced using technology that shouldn't exist in any time period, past or present. As Dr. Wainwright stared at the enhanced images, a horrifying realization began to dawn. This wasn't a photograph of a Victorian textile mill. This was documentation of some kind of experimental facility, where human beings were being systematically modified and tested using technology that appeared to come from an advanced civilization. Terror in the workers' eyes wasn't fear of harsh working conditions. It was the awareness that they were no longer entirely human, trapped in bodies that had been altered against their will and forced to operate machinery that was extracting something from them far more valuable than labor. The machines in the shadows weren't textile looms at all. They were harvesting equipment, designed to extract some essential element from the modified workers, while keeping them conscious and aware of what was being done to them. Dr. Wainwright's hands began to shake as he realized the full implications of what he was seeing. Someone, or something, had been conducting advanced biotechnological experiments on human subjects in 1889, using equipment and techniques that suggested either time travel or the involvement of non-human intelligence. But the most terrifying aspect of the photograph was what it suggested about the scope of these operations. This wasn't an isolated experiment. It was clearly an established facility with systematic procedures and multiple subjects. How many other factories had existed during the Victorian era? How many workers had been subjected to these modifications? And most importantly, what had happened to the technology and knowledge demonstrated in this photograph? This is where the story takes a turn that will make you question everything you think you know about human history. If your heart is racing, if you're feeling that mixture of terror and fascination that makes you want to keep reading but also want to run away, share this with someone right now, because what Dr. Wainwright discovered next will prove that this horror didn't end in 1889. Dr. Wainwright's investigation took a dramatic turn when he decided to research the specific location mentioned in the photograph's documentation. According to the label, the image had been taken at a textile mill in Birmingham. But his extensive knowledge of Victorian industrial sites told him that no major textile operations had existed at the address provided. His archival research revealed something far more disturbing than a simple geographic error. The address in question had been the site of what Victorian records described as a private medical research facility, operated by an organization called the Institute for Industrial Advancement. The facility had operated from 1887 to 1891, during which time it had employed over 200 workers in what was officially described as experimental manufacturing processes. But Dr. Wainwright's investigation into the institute revealed a web of connections that extended far beyond Victorian industrial experimentation. The funding for the facility had come from sources that seemed to exist outside normal financial institutions. The directors of the institute had backgrounds in fields that didn't exist in the 1880s: biotechnology, computational engineering, and what the records cryptically referred to as temporal mechanics. Most disturbing of all, Dr. Wainwright discovered that similar facilities had operated simultaneously in 17 different countries during the same time period. All had been funded by the same mysterious sources. All had conducted the same experimental manufacturing processes. And all had been shut down abruptly in 1891, with no explanation provided to local authorities. The workers from these facilities had simply vanished. There were no records of them seeking employment elsewhere, no documentation of their deaths, no trace of their existence after the facilities closed. It was as if 200 people from each location had been erased from history. But Dr. Wainwright's most chilling discovery came when he found shipping records from the Birmingham facility. Between 1887 and 1891, the Institute had received regular deliveries of equipment from suppliers that wouldn't exist for another century. The manifest descriptions included items like biointegration matrices, neural interface devices, and temporal stabilization units. Even more impossibly, the facility had shipped products to destinations that included dates in the future. Shipments were documented as being sent to addresses in 1923, 1957, and 2003, with delivery confirmations that had somehow been filed before the shipments had even left the facility. Dr. Wainwright realized he was looking at evidence of a coordinated operation that existed across multiple time periods simultaneously. The 1889 photograph wasn't documentation of a Victorian experiment. It was evidence of a systematic program to harvest something from modified humans across different historical eras. And that program was still active. His research revealed that facilities matching the same operational patterns as the Victorian Institute had existed throughout human history. Ancient Roman records described divine workshops where citizens were taken to serve mysterious benefactors. Medieval chronicles mentioned sacred factories where the chosen were transformed to serve higher purposes. Modern corporate records showed biotechnology companies conducting research that matched the same patterns of human modification documented in the 1889 photograph. The horrifying truth became clear. Humanity had been systematically harvested for centuries by entities operating outside normal time, using increasingly sophisticated methods to extract something essential from modified human subjects while maintaining the illusion of normal. Historical development. We're approaching the most terrifying part of this entire story. And I need you to be ready for what's coming. If you're still with me, if you're as horrified and fascinated as Dr. Wainwright was, make sure you're subscribed, because what he discovered about the current state of these operations will change how you see the world around you forever. The breakthrough that finally destroyed Dr. Wainwright's sanity came when he discovered that the 1889 photograph had been delivered to him as part of an active recruitment process. Hidden within the chemical structure of the photographic paper itself, Dr. Wainwright found microscopic markings that formed patterns when viewed under specific lighting conditions. These patterns weren't random. They were coordinates, mathematical formulas, and what appeared to be instructions written in a language that combined elements of advanced physics with symbols that matched no known human writing system. The message, when finally decoded, was both an invitation and a warning. Dr. Wainwright, your research skills have been monitored across multiple temporal coordinates. You have demonstrated the analytical capacity required for Level 7 integration. Report to the Birmingham coordinates on the specified date for voluntary enhancement, or remain in your current timeline and risk involuntary collection during the next harvesting cycle. Dr. Wainwright realized that his entire academic career, his specialization in industrial photography, his specific expertise in Victorian working conditions, all of it had been carefully orchestrated to lead him to this moment. He hadn't discovered the photograph by accident. He had been guided toward it by entities that had been observing and manipulating his development for decades. The specified date, mentioned in the message, was only 72 hours away. But the most horrifying revelation came when Dr. Wainwright researched the modern Birmingham coordinates provided in the message. The location was currently occupied by a biotechnology research facility that officially conducted medical device testing for major pharmaceutical companies. The facility employed over 400 people and was considered a model of modern industrial research. Using public records and satellite imagery, Dr. Wainwright discovered that the current facility showed the same architectural patterns as the Victorian Institute, the same electrical systems, the same ventilation designs, the same mysterious shipping and receiving patterns that had characterized the 1889 operation. The harvesting program had never stopped. It had simply evolved, becoming more sophisticated in its methods and more integrated into normal human society. Modern workers at biotechnology facilities, medical research institutions, and advanced manufacturing plants weren't just employees. They were potential subjects for the same modifications documented in the 1889 photograph. Dr. Wainwright realized that the entities running these operations had perfected their techniques over more than a century of human experimentation. Modern subjects could be enhanced and modified without their conscious awareness, integrated into the harvesting process while maintaining the illusion of normal employment. The terror in the eyes of the Victorian workers had been replaced by the unconscious compliance of modern subjects, who didn't even realize they were being systematically drained of whatever essential element these entities required. And Dr. Wainwright himself had been selected as the next subject for enhancement because his research skills made him valuable to their operations. This is the moment where everything comes together, where the full scope of this century-spanning horror becomes clear. If you're feeling that sense of dread, that realization that what you're learning might be more than just a story, drop a comment right now and tell me, have you ever worked at a research facility? Have you ever felt like your career was being guided in ways you didn't understand? On the night before the specified date in the decoded message, Dr. Wainwright made a decision that would save his life, but cost him everything else. Instead of reporting to the Birmingham coordinates, he destroyed every copy of the 1889 photograph, eliminated all of his research data, and fled England. But destroying the evidence wasn't enough. Dr. Wainwright knew that if these entities could manipulate time itself, they could simply retrieve the information from an earlier point in the timeline. His only chance for survival was to make himself completely inaccessible to their collection operations. He liquidated his assets, abandoned his identity, and disappeared into the Canadian wilderness, settling in a remote cabin where he could monitor for any signs that the entities were attempting to locate him. The isolation and constant fear of discovery took a devastating toll on Dr. Wainwright's mental health. The knowledge of what he had discovered, the realization that human civilization had been systematically exploited for centuries by entities operating outside normal time, left him unable to interact with normal society. Every person he encountered could potentially be an enhanced subject working for the harvesting operations. Every institution could be a front for the entity's activities. Every piece of technology could be monitoring his location and activities. Dr. Wainwright spent his remaining years documenting what he had learned, creating detailed records of the evidence he had found and the conclusions he had reached. But he was careful never to reproduce the actual photograph or to provide specific location information that could lead others into the same trap that had been laid for him. His final journal entry, found after his death from natural causes in 2019, contained a warning that has been largely dismissed by academic institutions. They are still active. They are still harvesting. They have integrated their operations so completely into modern society that resistance seems impossible. The only protection is complete isolation from all industrial and technological systems. Do not trust any organization that conducts biological research. Do not work for any company that has access to advanced manufacturing equipment. And above all, do not investigate temporal anomalies in historical photographs. They used these discoveries to identify and recruit individuals with the analytical skills they require for their operations. But Dr. Wainwright's warning may have come too late. His research assistants from Cambridge have reported receiving anonymous deliveries of historical photographs showing unexplained anomalies. Several have already begun investigations into what they believe to be routine authentication projects. The recruitment process continues, just as it has for over a century. The entities behind the harvesting operations have learned to use humanity's own curiosity and academic ambition as tools to identify and capture the subjects they require. And somewhere in Birmingham, in a facility that appears to conduct legitimate medical research, the work continues. Enhanced subjects report for their shifts, unconscious of the modifications that have been made to their bodies and minds. The machinery hums with the same efficiency it displayed in the 1889 photograph, extracting whatever essential element these entities require from human subjects, who no longer remember what they used to be. We've reached the end of Dr. Wainwright's story. But this horror is far from over. If this revelation has shaken you to your core, if you're now looking at the world around you with new eyes and wondering what other horrors are hiding in plain sight, I need you to take action. Follow this channel immediately, because there are more stories like this, more evidence of systematic exploitation that spans centuries. Share this with everyone you know, because awareness might be our only defense against entities that operate outside our understanding of time and reality. And tell me in the comments, have you ever noticed anything strange about your workplace? Have you ever felt like you were being monitored or guided in ways you couldn't explain? Your experiences could be more important than you realize. The truth is that Dr. Wainwright's discovery might not be an isolated case. Industrial facilities around the world continue to operate using technologies and methods that seem more advanced than they should be. Biotechnology companies conduct research that appears to serve agendas beyond their stated corporate purposes. Workers in certain industries report experiences that suggest their employers have capabilities that exceed normal human technological development. If these entities are real, if the harvesting operations documented in the 1889 photograph represent an ongoing exploitation of humanity, then our only hope lies in recognition and resistance. We must learn to identify the signs of these operations, to question the true purposes of the institutions we work for, and to resist the recruitment processes that target individuals with specific skills and knowledge. But resistance requires awareness, and awareness requires sharing information. Every person who learns about these operations, who begins to question the true nature of modern industrial society, represents a potential threat to entities that depend on human ignorance and compliance. The choice is yours. You can dismiss Dr. Wainwright's story as fiction, return to your normal life, and hope that you never encounter evidence of these operations yourself. Or you can begin to look more carefully at the world around you, to question the true purposes of the institutions you interact with, and to share this information with others who might be able to help build a network of awareness and resistance. Dr. Wainwright paid the ultimate price for his discovery, his career, his sanity, and ultimately his life. But his sacrifice provided us with the knowledge we need to recognize and resist these operations. The question is, what will you do with that knowledge? The entities that have been harvesting humanity for centuries are counting on your compliance, your willingness to dismiss uncomfortable truths as fiction, your desire to continue living in the comfortable illusion of normal society. But you now know the truth. You've seen the evidence. You understand the scope of what we're facing. What happens next is up to you.